Tonight on CBC Vancouver News.
We're going to be announcing 2 enhanced tax measures as well as relief for renters.
The Premier pledges help against the rising cost of living.
People are going to have waited almost a calendar year for any type of tangible help from this government.
What it means for you. Also, the search is over. Police arrest the suspect wanted in the horrific stabbing rampage in Saskatchewan.
They're an iconic species.
And that's why the province wants your help as it looks into the death of more sturgeon in a big BC river.
This is CBC Vancouver News.
Good evening, I'm Dan Burritt. Thanks for joining us. Anita is away this week. The BC government is introducing long-awaited new measures meant to try to help people facing the rising cost of living. It includes capping the allowable rent increase for 2023 at 2% and boosting the next climate action credit. As Mira Baines tells us, the opposition says the moves are coming too slowly.
On our behalf today, we're going to be announcing 2 enhanced tax measures as well as relief for renters.
Premier John Horgan made the announcement on a soccer field, hoping to highlight help is on the way for families. The BC government has faced criticism over not acting fast enough to help people deal with inflation and rising costs. The province says the 2% rent cap for next year will replace the current cap equal to inflation. Still, some landlords are struggling with higher interest rates and repair costs. In terms of tax measures, the Climate Action Tax Credit for low and moderate income BC residents will be increased by up to $164 per adult and $41 per child. The family benefit, formerly known as the Child Opportunity Benefit, will jump by up to $58 per month for each child from January to March. To help with the cost of living and rising gas prices, the government previously announced ICBC rebate checks of $110. The official opposition is questioning why it's taken the government months to bring in measures, many which don't come into effect until January.
Why did it take 4.5, 5 months for the Premier and the Finance Minister to basically add to programs that already exist? Again, people are going to have waited almost a calendar year for any type of tangible help from this government.
Finance Minister Selina Robinson says the province is watching how economic conditions play out.
And we're going to continue to monitor how our economy continues to manage through this inflationary period. The Bank of Canada raised interest rates again and again.
The province says more information about a BC hydro benefit will be coming later this year. Meanwhile, federal Liberal cabinet ministers are meeting in Vancouver to discuss ways the federal government can help Canadians cope with inflation. Mira Baines, CBC News, Vancouver.
Well, today's announcement has many BC renters breathing a sigh of relief. Some landlords worry the cap is too restrictive given their rising costs. The CBC's Leanne Young has been tracking reaction for us. Leanne, what do you have?
Well, Dan, this was not the news that landlords say they wanted to hear. The advocacy group Landlord BC says they've been talking to the province about rent increases since early spring. They anticipated that there would be some sort of rent cap, but nothing as low as 2%, considering Canada's inflation rate is hovering around 7 to 8%. They were shocked and disappointed by today's announcement.
Because our expenses and insurance and utilities, everything have gone through the roof. And so, when you're trying to sort of reconcile, how do I maintain my building, invest in it, and hopefully, make a little bit of money because we're, in the market rental housing, it's just not sustainable. But we're basically in a negative cash flow situation. And
So Hutniak says what they wanted to see was a 5.3% increase. That's the maximum allowable increase this year based on a formula prescribed in the Residential Tenancy Act. It's what Hutniak says his membership expects, and they need that consistency to run sustainable businesses. He points out that over the last several years, the province has implemented rent freezes, and last year they capped the increase at 1.5% and now 2%. And there are other ways to help renters, he says, for example, offering a rebate. The province gave a $400 rebate to renters repaid 2 years ago. He suggests trying that again, but increasing the amount to $1,000 instead of making landlords shoulder the financial burden.
Leanne, on the other side, how are renters reacting to the news today?
Well, Dan, there's mixed reaction there. While some people are glad there's going to be caps on rent, lower than what's normally allowable, others say having to pay a 2% increase on top of what are often already astronomical rents is simply too much, and they're highly critical of the BC government.
You know, the BC NDP is sort of pitching this as their big help to renters. What it is that instead of giving us something that is totally undoable, they're giving us something that's still extremely painful, and they're calling it, a special renter-friendly policy. It's simply not.
Instead, what Gare and others like him wanted to see was a rent freeze, 0%, while people try to catch their breath with skyrocketing costs in every other aspect of their lives, at least until the end of the pandemic. He also points to the need for vacancy control. He's concerned that some landlords will bypass the rent cap by relisting their units for much more rent after a tenant moves out. An immediate solution, he says, that would go a long way to help with the housing affordability crisis. Dan?
Leanne Young, live for us in studio tonight. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Significant breaking news out of Saskatchewan tonight. The suspect in the mass stabbing that shattered a community in that province is dead. 32-year-old Miles Sanderson was arrested late this afternoon and died sometime after that. He had evaded police since Sunday when the bodies of 10 people were found in James Smith Cree Nation. Now, Sanderson was stopped on a highway near Rosthern, Saskatchewan. It's about 45 minutes north of Saskatoon, as you can see. Now, family members and neighbors of the victims in the mass stabbing are beginning to share their experiences. Aaron Collins spoke to community members about how they're rallying together.
When you're stuck, pinned down by sorrow, sometimes all you can do is try to keep going.
Just staying busy help you?
Yeah, that's my way of grieving.
There's fun snacks for kids.
Dawn Robbins' days are full helping kids from her community one care package at a time.
Is each bag for one bag per family? Is that how it goes?
No, it's one bag per child.
One bag per child.
Yeah, so that they're ready to go.
For Robbins, this tragedy, this pain is a shared burden.
We're all impacted. You know, our country, the world is being impacted. We've seen this, time and time again, where there's tragedy and we come together. We grieve with other people, other nations, other communities, other places across the country, and they're grieving with us now. And all the help and support is needed.
The demand is huge. Any opportunity to help seized by family, friends, and neighbors of those wrestling with incalculable grief.
It still feels like it's a nightmare. It doesn't feel real. When we think about people passing away from natural causes, those are still hard, but we find a way to get through this. This is really hard.
Hard for an entire community shaken to its core by this tragedy.
We have one of our aunties that's been affected by this traumatically, as she's related to 70 of these victims. That was her home community. So you can see the devastation of what this is to our family.
So what to do with pain this raw? For now, it comes down to this. Another trip to the store. The act of doing something, anything, a way to ease the pain.
So how long do you think you're going to have to be making trips like this?
We've at the center committed to the end of the week, but prolonged ongoing support is still needed. We're just getting started, and I just want to be able to have the community get their feet on the ground and be able to do what they need to do on their end while we look after this.
Another trip home weighed down by groceries and grief. A way to just keep moving.
Aaron Collins reporting from Saskatchewan tonight. To other news now, the days of limited stock at BC liquor and cannabis stores seem to be drawing to a close That's thanks to a new tentative deal between the province and public sector workers. The BC General Employees Union announced an agreement with the province today, which will affect 33,000 of its members who work directly for government. The 3-year deal includes wage increases of more than 3% in the first year and up to 6.75% in year 2, the highest public sector wage increase BC has seen in years. One economist argues, though, it's still not enough.
It's still very likely to be the case that over the 3 years of this agreement, public sector workers face real wage cuts, right? And what does that mean, right? Sure, your nominal wage, the dollar you get on your paycheck might increase, but that is unlikely to keep up with inflationary pressures in the economy.
And the deal has yet to be ratified by BC GEU members. No date has been set on that vote or when it will happen. The Bank of Canada, meanwhile, has raised its key lending rate by 0.75 percentage point. The hike today is the 5th consecutive rise this year as the central bank moves aggressively to tackle high inflation. Nisha Patel takes a closer look at what that means to many Canadians.
After yet another interest rate hike, some Canadians with fixed payments have peace of mind for now.
We've got some stability. We know our paychecks are paying the mortgage. We don't have the uncertainty.
We locked into a fixed rate 2 years ago, so we're fine until 2026.
But others are feeling the pain of rising rates. Kevin Tran just bought a home with a variable rate mortgage.
It sucks. Yeah, it's pretty tough for a lot of people right now.
Higher interest rates make borrowing more expensive, so they're the tool the Bank of Canada uses to get consumers to slow their spending and help bring runaway inflation under control.
All central bankers have been caught flat-footed by just how aggressive inflation has been in the last 18 months.
And while there are signs inflation may have peaked, today the central bank signaled its job isn't over. In a statement revealing, given the outlook for inflation, the policy interest rate will need to rise further, giving concerned homeowners across the country even more reason to call up mortgage brokers.
80% have zero knowledge that their payment could someday go up.
Take the example of a $500,000 mortgage. Earlier this year, a variable rate mortgage holder was likely paying less than $2,000 a month. But after the series of rate hikes we've seen since March, that borrower could be paying more than $3,000 a month.
For all those hundreds of thousands of renewals that are going to occur in 2023 and throughout the rest of this year, it is going to be a very substantial change in what they're paying.
Higher interest rates have already started to weigh on the broader economy. Residential construction has slipped and the housing market has slumped.
You're going to see declines in employment and hours worked. That's going to affect consumer spending, and that's going to affect, in turn, other sectors of the economy.
Still, the central bank is expected to press on in its efforts to rein in inflation. Most market watchers expect another interest rate hike, though perhaps a smaller one, when the central bank meets next month. Nisha Patel, CBC News, Toronto.
A battle between an animal hospital and a dog owner in Surrey is moving from TikTok into court. The vet clinic is suing its former client for alleged defamation. As Rihanna Schmunk reports, the clinic claims her viral videos aren't true and are hurting the business.
Victoria Vera posted the clip on TikTok showing part of an argument between herself and an employee at Surrey Animal Hospital.
You're absolutely insane. You're absolutely insane, and I'm phoning the police right now.
The TikTok ended up getting more than 800,000 views. It became one of several TikToks from Vera about the vet. She says her dog Charlie developed an infection after she took him to be neutered earlier this year. And she claims that was the vet's fault.
I brought my dog to a slaughterhouse. Okay, I shouldn't say that. That's mean. I'll take that back. But I took him to a bad vet, that's for sure.
Surrey Animal Hospital is now suing Vera for defamation. It claims the infection was actually her fault and says her TikToks are reprehensible, false, and damaging the clinic's reputation. Legal experts say defamation lawsuits involving claims on social media are becoming more and more common as people get more comfortable with airing their opinions on social media. But TikTok is a new arena.
There have been many involving other social media platforms, Twitter, Facebook, and the like. And so I'm not surprised that TikTok has finally had its turn, and this is a trend that is increasing.
So, TikTok claims are rarer, but experts say a bad review on the app could be more likely to provoke a lawsuit. First, because it's one of the most popular apps in the world. And second, there's the viral component. A claim on TikTok can reach millions of people overnight, even if the creator didn't intend for that to happen. That matters.
There are a bunch of things that the courts will look at when assessing damages, but one of them is definitely how far has the defamatory message been circulated and what kind of impact has it had? So it's not hard to imagine in a viral scenario where something spreads like wildfire on one of these platforms, that the business has actually been damaged as a result, because the reputation so quickly has been tarnished by this messaging going across.
None of the allegations from Surrey Animal Hospital have been proven, and Vera has not responded to the lawsuit in court. Brianna Schmunk, CBC News, Vancouver.
BC Liberal leader Kevin Falcon held a ribbon-cutting ceremony of sorts for a Massey bridge that was proposed but never built.
And unfortunately, we're having an opening today, which is not an opening. It's an opening for a bridge that should have been, but instead, because of the NDP government's decision, we're going to wait another decade.
The NDP government killed that bridge project and has now opted for a new tunnel. Falcon says cancelling the bridge is the worst political decision he's seen. Now, despite being in office for 16 years, the BC Liberals did not break ground on the proposed Massey Bridge. Falcon was Transportation Minister from 2004 to 2009. An Englishman has pleaded guilty to the murder of a 19-year-old Vernon woman. Ashley Wadsworth moved to the UK last November to be with her boyfriend, Jack Seppel. The teenager was killed a few months later on February 1st after someone attacked and stabbed her multiple times. Seppel was arrested at the scene and later charged. Today, he admitted to killing Wadsworth during a trial preparation. He's expected to be sentenced in October. The last of 6 police officers injured in the shootout near a bank in Saanich was released from hospital today.
As much as he's driven to recover and resume life and return to work, it's going to take time, and his body is going to require that time to heal properly, and we'll wait for him.
The attempted robbery happened over 2 months ago and led to a shooting that left the 2 suspects dead and 6 officers from Saanich and Victoria Police Departments hurt. One of the Saanich officers has made a full recovery and returned to active duty, while the officer released today will continue to recuperate at home. Both the IIO and RCMP are still investigating the robbery, but key questions like the number of and types of guns the suspects used remains unanswered. Public hearings on Islamophobia were held in Vancouver today. A Senate committee is hearing from experts and witnesses with their personal experiences. And those experts say Islamophobia is growing in BC and Canada, and more education and support programs are desperately needed. Canada has suffered more mass killings motivated by Islamophobia in the last 5 years than any other country in the G7. Officials are calling for more awareness of Islamophobia into education curricula of all kinds. In BC, advocates say there is a dire need for more support programs.
The things that we hear about most often are the violent, explicit acts of Islamophobia that happen, right? The tragic events in London, Ontario, at the Quebec Mosque, Muslim women on the street wearing the hijab being verbally and physically assaulted. But I think the effects are also felt through the microaggressions that people feel in the workplace, right? Those more subtle forms of Islamophobia, and that takes a toll on people's mental health, because you're not feeling it just once, you're feeling it day in, day out.
Advocates say more funding is needed for resources to prevent and address Islamophobia in this province. As we told you yesterday, the rollout of BC's fall COVID-19 booster and flu shot program is expected to begin next week. But some medical experts and volunteers from the South Asian community say the messaging still is not reaching some of the most vulnerable people. The South Asian COVID Task Force was created by volunteers to help reduce transmission in the community at the height of the pandemic. And members of the volunteer-run group are asking why they weren't approached ahead of this latest vaccine rollout to help spread the message to South Asian community members.
The province knows there's so many volunteers that are ready to help, and they know who we are. We've put our names out there, and we're more than happy, despite our busy schedules, to help, get the messaging across and make sure everyone gets the vaccine as they need. So we're here to help. So it'd be lovely to involve us so that we can work together.
She says at the peak of transmission, there was a real lack of targeted messaging to diverse communities, and her task force was created to break that barrier. CBC News asked BC's Health Ministry to comment, but did not hear back by our deadline. Provincial scientists are asking for your help as they look into the unexpected death of prehistoric fish in BC. The province says dead adult white sturgeon are spotted occasionally on the lower Fraser River, usually in the summer, but 11 of the ancient fish have been found dead in the Nechako River in the past week. Scientists are running tests, but they don't think the fish died from chemicals or getting caught by fisheries.
No net scars, no visible signs of mortality, no indications of disease, these sorts of things. So, but that doesn't, so there's a few things that the information isn't pointing in that direction, but is there a clear cause? No, not at this point.
So that's why they're asking anyone who sees a dead white sturgeon near the Nechako to take a photo of the animal and then alert the province. White sturgeon in the upper Fraser and Nechako rivers are listed as endangered. They can grow up to 18 feet long and live for more than a century. Wildfires burning across BC have plenty of communities still on alert. The Battleship Mountain wildfire near Hudson's Hope remains out of control. So far, it's burned an area of more than 100 square kilometers, about the size of Vancouver itself. Further south, the Heather Lake wildfire in Manning Park is burning out of control, 10 kilometers from Eastgate. 180 properties in the community of Eastgate and rural Princeton are on evacuation alert. That fire has grown to 38,000 hectares in size. About half of it is across the border in the U.S. And meteorologist Johanna Wagstaffe joins us now with the forecast. Joe, you're watching winds very carefully tonight, and that has fire officials concerned.
You're right, Dan. Even BC Wildfire Services tweeting out the cold front that is bringing those wind gusts up to 50 to 60 kilometers per hour right now across the interior. And we saw those wind gusts in Metro Vancouver earlier today, actually canceling some ferry sailings and leading to over 6,000 customers without power across the Lower Mainland at this hour. I want to take you to the fire danger rating, though, because, of course, those winds really fanning those existing fires we just mentioned, both in the northeast and then the Manning Park, the fire near Manning Park, I should say, where we still have high to extreme fire danger. And this cold front didn't bring a lot in the way of rain or a big cool down. We will see a couple of degrees drop. Just look at those current wind gusts. Kelowna was up around 50 kilometers per hour earlier today, starting to die down, but YVR is still at 43 kilometers per hour at this hour. So that is changing the direction of wildfire smoke. We still have the special weather statements in place, both for the Okanagan through to the Kootenays, basically the valleys in our interior where that smoke is getting locked in place. Winds now coming from the northwest means it's pushing smoke towards the southeast. So you get a couple days break if you've been in the line of fire. However, the valley is sort of really seeing this smoke entrenched. So still looking at widespread reduced visibility, particularly along Highway 3. Just want to bring you south of the border. Dan mentioned that fire burning south of the border, high fire warnings across a huge swath of western U.S. And you can see all those reds in through California. That's the excessive heat warning. Now, the top of that high pressure is going to punch back up into our neck of the woods. Nothing like the extreme heat we're seeing south of the border, but after a couple of fresh days, Dan, with those northwesterly winds, heat back in time for the weekend. So I'll take you through some of those temperatures, but unfortunately just not getting the rain we could use along with those gusty winds today.
No kidding. Okay, thanks very much, Joe.
You're welcome.
Millions of Canadians, perhaps you, lost their mobile and internet services when that Rogers network went down in July. At the time, Ottawa demanded telecoms put a plan in place to make sure it does not happen again. Today, the industry minister announced that plan.
Going forward, should one of these providers be faced with a major outage, the other companies commit to providing the support and the assistance necessary so that Canadians can still reach their loved ones, reach out to 911, and conduct business transactions. As part of this agreement, the companies also commit to providing clear and timely communications as Canadian expected to keep Canadians and appropriate authorities informed about response and restoration during these outages.
Rogers says the massive outage in July was caused by an error during an update. To the silver screen now, the Vancouver International Film Festival has announced its selections for 2022. Film buffs will have a bit of an embarrassment of riches with 135 feature films and 102 short films to pick from. Offerings from around the world include The Banshees of Inisherin and starring Colin Farrell, Broker, a South Korean crime story about baby adoption, and The Grisly Truth, a film exploring the lost history of Vancouver's NBA team from Vancouver director Kathleen James.
The struggles there's been for the last couple of years. But, I think it's also really important that at times like these, we focus on rewards as well. And for those of us who've been involved in putting together the festival program over the last 8 months, it's been a remarkably rewarding experience.
Over 4,000 films were watched and considered for this year's festival. Founded in 1982, VIFF is marking its 40th anniversary this year. Friday is the deadline to register for local elections across our province. And in Vancouver, the mayor and all 10 councillors are seeking re-election. But have they worked well together the past 4 years? Our Justin McElroy takes a closer look.
On April 15th, 2020, Vancouver City Council officially went into the toilet.
Yeah, everybody, please mute your phones if you can, please.
And your toilets. It was a unique moment in what has been a unique council, the first one since 1986, where no one party has held a majority of seats. But has it been a well-functioning one? Here is a chart. It shows the number of times the past 2 years that council meetings have gone on for more than 4 hours. And here, at the bottom, is Vancouver, almost as many as the rest of the region combined. Now, you might say that the biggest city should have the longest meetings. But here is another chart. It shows the number of times Vancouver has needed multiple days to finish just a single council agenda. It used to happen about 5 times a year. Now, it's triple that. Vancouver is the only place in Canada where single pieces of legislation regularly take several days to be voted on, and it's gained attention.
It's a mess, frankly. As somebody who watches city councils at work across the country, Vancouver is the city council I at least want to be stuck sitting through.
But why is it a mess? Well, one reason is that minority council. With no party controlling things, it means more gets figured out on the council table. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. But in most minority governments, there's a stable coalition that ends up passing things together, or else an election happens. But city governments can't have snap elections, and there has been no stable coalition. On housing policy, the mayor relies on one group of councillors to pass his policy. But on other issues like finances, it's a different group of councillors generally that support him. So because there's no stable coalition, everyone thinks any idea they have can be passed. And that means lots of motions. Here's another chart showing the number of motions by year and the huge spike in the first 2 years of this council. And to every motion, there are amendments and amendments to the amendments. And almost every passed motion asks staff to study a thing. And most councillors now admit they went overboard.
If you're putting forward 50 motions, everybody's come with priorities. And what we're seeing right now is a real toll, a toll on our staff.
I have a lot of respect for colleagues around the table, but I think this council has been far too chaotic.
So to summarize, Vancouver tried a minority council for the first time in decades. It had no stable governing coalition, it had more motions than ever before, and it has rules around public feedback that are more expansive than anywhere in Canada, all leading to more marathon meetings than anywhere else in the country. But the mayor still says it was a job well done.
I do think on the big stuff that Vancouverites care about, we actually have put in the time and made them happen. So I think they said we met for 500 hours last year, which is a lot. But in the end, it was worth it because I think we got enough stuff passed that is making a difference.
Voters will decide whether he is right. But since everyone on this council is seeking re-election, it may look exactly the same for another 4 years. Unless, that is, voters give them the flush.
Are Canadians losing faith in our public healthcare system? A new poll suggests that's the case. How things might be turned around after this. And thank you to everyone watching our commercial-free live stream tonight. Hello. Bagpipes may not be the first thing that springs to mind when you think of kids learning a new instrument, but for the Lord Selkirk Robert Fraser Memorial Pipe Band in Winnipeg, it's the experience of a lifetime.
What? Mark.
This is the Lord Selkirk Robert Fraser Memorial Pipe Band. It's been an opportunity for kids in Winnipeg to play music for free for 65 years.
There was a lot of really good times, and there's also rough times.
I was forced into it a little bit, but I've grown to love it.
I really enjoy playing the snare drum. I like how I can, emphasize dynamics.
As you keep going, you'll get more and more of a sense of pride.
Shows like this are how the band attracts new members, like 12-year-old Spencer Roberts.
They used to practice near our house, and we heard them playing one day, so we checked them out online.
The pandemic drove them inside, stopping all recruitment for 2 years. Now, organizers are worried about sustaining the tradition.
In 5 years, as the current members of the band are graduating, we're going to have a void of new members. So we could be in line for a very small band if we don't get members starting out soon.
Organizers with other groups in Winnipeg say kids have been slow to return to many free music programs now that they have the opportunity. They say not only do these programs keep kids out of trouble, they help them to discover their gifts. Alyssa Vrew started in April, and already she's playing Happy Birthday.
The biggest lesson I think that comes out of this program is that I can, because people come in here not being able to DJ or play drums or play guitar or bang on a piano or whatever. They don't know how, and then they learn how to wiggle their fingers, or they learn how to strum a pick, or they learn how to twist some knobs, and suddenly they go from I can't to I can.
This is Desmond William Young in 2018 at the Valor Music Program. Now William Young's playing gigs and giving back as a volunteer.
And this program has allowed me to perform concerts and allowed me to meet important people.
Organizers of the pipe band say they provide pipes and uniforms. And no, kids don't need to be Scottish to join. Andrew Wiles, CBC News, Winnipeg.
Parliament resumes in less than 2 weeks, and the Liberal cabinet is meeting here in Vancouver to figure out a game plan, one that keeps the NDP alongside in its arrangement and the Conservatives out. David Cochran reports.
She's the Minister of Finance during a time of great financial strain, but Canadians counting on bold federal action may be disappointed.
We are going to continue to take a balanced and careful approach as we have done all of this year. So we understand that the most vulnerable in our society need to be supported.
The need is clear, the response is not, only that it will dominate the conversation at this cabinet retreat, and that as tough as things are here, others have it worse.
We have this year the strongest growth in the G7. We have this year lowest debt and deficit in the G7. And inflation is elevated in Canada, but compared to our peer countries, it's lower.
Justin Trudeau and the Liberals have been too busy saying it's better in Canada and worse everywhere else. Well, that doesn't help a family that can't afford their groceries.
On the other coast, the Liberals' political partner is getting impatient. The New Democrats have promised to support the Liberal minority government, but there are limits.
We're demanding this government put in place real supports to give people respect.
So growing pressure after a summer of heat over everything from airports, passports, and immigration applications. The failure during a third term in power to deliver on the nuts and bolts of government. Ministers insist things are getting better, but not totally settled.
Look, I've learned that throughout the COVID pandemic it's very difficult to make a prediction. I just want to re-emphasize that our government is focused on doing everything we can, on working with our partners to ease the situation.
The political pressure will increase this weekend when the Conservatives select their new leader. A jolt of renewal for the opposition as the government grapples with the biggest cost of living crisis in a generation. David Cochran, CBC News, Vancouver.
A new survey suggests 41% of Canadians who sought non-emergency treatment in recent months faced difficulty, something that's disproportionately affecting lower wage earners. More now from the CBC's Thomas Dagla.
Outside the hospital in border town Fort Erie, Ontario, nearly everyone has a story to tell about trying to access Canada's suffering healthcare system.
I was hoping if I came here, showed up, that maybe I'll tell them how damn dizzy I am, my age, my husband's age, and that they'd fit me in.
Instead, they're leaving with an appointment in a week. Sound familiar? A new Angus Reid Institute survey suggests 41% of Canadians who sought non-emergency treatment in recent months found it difficult or very difficult.
A few years ago it was way better. You didn't wait as long in an emergency or anything.
The scene in Fort Erie, a reflection of trouble across Canada, with an aging population and a hospital facing such a dire staffing crunch, its urgent care center earlier this year had to temporarily close. A stark contrast to the perceived availability of care in the country across the river.
I would never think that it would come to that. 20, 30 years ago when we say, oh, in the States, my God, if you get sick there, you're dead.
People on this side of the border now say they run into more hurdles seeking health care, with Americans twice as likely to report comfortable access to the care they need.
People always will say, well, it has to do with the fact that Americans are paying for their care and Canadians don't. This isn't about cost, this is about access.
Although private U.S. healthcare typically ensures greater access for those with a greater income, this research finds in Canada, too, lower wage earners report bigger barriers.
Canadians need to get loud. They need to speak to their politicians. They need to get them to the table with all of us.
Healthcare access affects everyone. Long considered a matter of national pride, now a concern across the country. Thomas Dagg, CBC News, Fort Erie, Ontario.
Days of fright and trepidation are over in Saskatchewan with news the suspect in the deadly mass stabbing is dead. More on the Conservative leadership race, after this.
Here in Canada, Labor Day is simply a day for working people to celebrate their trades, their common goals, and their common struggles. But for many these days, there's not much to cheer about. Cutbacks, unemployment, and anti-union legislation have all hit labor hard, and no one seems to feel it more than the unions in British Columbia. Jerry Thompson reports.
Look for a symbol of how much labor unions have lost in British Columbia, and you find this Omnimax Theater, built by union workers at Expo 86, right beside a non-union project on the same site. Last week, a new law declared this a special economic development zone, where unions cannot strike and cannot refuse to work beside non-union crews. And now there's talk of more union-free development zones.
I think that is the only way that we're going to eliminate some of the red tape and the problems that we're presently having and bring new economic development here.
For all unions in BC, it's been another year of struggle, with no clear victories, hardly anything worth celebrating. At this Labor Day picnic, BC government employees, those who still have jobs, now hear that Premier Bennett might try to take away their right to strike.
What the government is doing now is just part of a continuing campaign, I believe, to get rid of unions in British Columbia. This is not a happy province.
The story of Labor's battle with the Bennett government has been preserved in a documentary produced by Operation Solidarity. Solidarity plans to launch the film in Toronto next month with screenings across Canada, an effort to warn people about the effects of so-called restraint budgets.
You know, everything that's bad is in British Columbia.
the worst unemployment, the worst economic recovery, the most bankruptcies, the most labor unrest. All of these things happen in British Columbia.
This year's setbacks have convinced some labor leaders the only way to win is at the ballot box. And they hope the people who supported Solidarity will still have the fighting spirit for the next provincial election. Jerry Thompson, CBC News, Vancouver.
More than 6 months into Russia's war on Ukraine, casualties are mounting on both sides. Heavy fighting is being reported on 3 fronts: in the north near Kharkiv, in the east in the Donbass, and in the south in Kherson region, where Ukrainian forces have mounted a counteroffensive to try to retake territory now occupied by Russian forces. The CBC's Susan Ormiston reports on how residents are trying to survive.
A barrage of rockets began this week, numbingly routine now. A medical center for babies and families was knocked out. Nothing military about it, says its director.
400 лет они так воюют.
They don't care where they hit. The main thing for them is to hit. Clearly, it's terrorism, he says. The clinic was empty overnight, so the damage is structural, but psychological too. The Russian message to Mykolaiv: we can hurt you. Maria and her son strap on a box of foodstuffs from the World Food Program. Every night they're shelling, she says, shaking my windows, my doors, and me. I can't sleep till morning. She's afraid for her kids, but she's stayed, still hopeful. I still think our boys, the soldiers, sons and fathers, will defend, so I won't go anywhere. In the city center, water pipes are torn apart, so potable water means a daily fill-up. Sergei counts out the liters for cooking, drinking, and the toilet, just for one day. It's war. It's unrestrained, he says. They're not human. Those who've stayed are adapting, lining up patiently for hours for one hot takeaway meal every day. With the front close and a Ukrainian offensive restarted about 10 days ago, blood is urgently needed. But the military shrouds its results and is enforcing sweeping restrictions on battlefield reporting. This is the southern territory that Ukraine is trying to protect. We're about halfway between Mykolaiv and Kherson, occupied by the Russians since March. The front line is to the south here, and this is a pretty active area for shelling still. To the northeast, Alexei's got his crop off and will start sowing a new one next week. Ukrainians chased the Russians out of here in the spring, but the battle is close. Just over here. Yesterday, 4 explosions were over there, 2 incoming. But he says our boys are holding their positions. You have to believe in the Ukrainian military. He does, like most we've spoken to. But nothing is settled here in the embattled south. Susan Ormiston, CBC News, Mykolaiv, Ukraine.
The Conservative Party will announce its new leader this Saturday in Ottawa. Nearly 425,000 ballots are being processed. That is a record, the most ever cast for the leadership of any political party in Canada. While Pierre Poilievre is widely expected to win the top job, as Hannah Thibodeau shows us, Conservatives are divided over where the party is headed.
Hundreds pack a room in Vancouver, out to cast their ballots for a man they want to lead Canada.
He's for the hardworking Canadian, the one that works his hardest and still can't pay the bills, can't buy a house.
But not all Conservatives are impressed with the direction Pierre Poilievre is taking the party. Some took out memberships to try to stop him from winning because they say his message is too extreme.
I find Pierre Poilievre is much more the attack dog, and I just don't really think it's good for a prime minister.
A new group called Centre Ice Canadians is trying to make political discourse less extreme, even luring a former BC Liberal premier who took out a Conservative membership to support Jean Charest.
I joined the Conservative Party for the first time in my life so I could cast a ballot for him. If he doesn't win, I will have been, a Conservative for, 60 days.
BC's provincial Liberal Party does lean more Conservative, and Clark fears Poilievre will leave many on the right homeless.
The whole party will have moved to the right, and I think left a whole lot of people who used to consider themselves Red Tory or Brian Mulroney Conservatives. They'll have nowhere to go.
Proud to be Alberta-born! Other Conservatives argue Poilievre will make the party stronger, since he has nearly half the caucus backing him and has helped swell the ranks of the federal Conservatives to be the largest political party in Canadian history.
I think that many people are just excited for a period of stability.
But this former prime minister had a warning for the next leader.
It's one thing to win a leadership convention, but you better win the next election, or you're going to find the landing in the Conservative Party pretty tough.
And then that will become the next question. Can Poilievre's type of politics win over not only those within the Conservative Party, but also the majority of Canadians in the next election? Hannah Thibodeau, CBC News, Ottawa.
Ocean temperatures are on the rise, and that's putting some sea life at risk. How that's impacting the waters of Prince Edward Island. Coming up. And it's 6:45, almost 6. A live look at Departure Bay in Nanaimo tonight. A warm but windy day across the south coast. Johanna will have your BC-wide weather forecast right after this.
How would you like to have a playful bear cub like one of these for a pet instead of a dog or cat? In just a moment, Greg Hellum will talk to Tom Hughes of the SPCA about Mitzi and the problems of looking after this rather unusual pet.
Good afternoon. Well, Tom, just how old is this bear?
Mitzi is 40 months old, Greg. 40 months this
just
month.
about over a year old.
A little over a year, Greg, yeah.
And just what type is she?
She's the common brown or black bear, Greg, which we find here in BC. It's quite common to this area.
Yes, and just where was she found?
Well, Greg, she was found as a little cub up in northern BC by a trapper, and the mother had been killed, and she was given to the Stanley Park Zoo in Vancouver last year.
Yes, and just what does she eat? Is she a meat eater?
Yes, they are meat eaters, Greg, but normally they eat fruit, bread, or anything else that they can get from, in captivity anyway. They're given a lot of bread and fruit. Salmon, they're very good fishermen, Greg. They're better salmon fishermen than you or I.
And just how big will she grow?
Oh, they grow to about 6 feet high when they're standing on the hind legs, Greg.
And will this bear grow any bigger?
Oh, yes, she'll grow to full size.
Yes. And is she dangerous at all? Is she part trained?
No, she's not trained at all, Greg, and she will become dangerous eventually as she grows bigger and becomes to a full size.
I've heard of penguins molting and such. Do these bears molt?
Yes, they molt in the spring, Greg, when they're coming out of hibernation.
And is this one?
This is just in the process of the molt now.
I see. What are the main types of bears?
Well, here in BC, Greg, there's 3 sorts of bears. There's the brown or black bear, such as Mitzi here. There's the grizzly bear, and farther north, much farther north, the polar bear.
Now, what are the differences between them?
The main differences are colour and size, Greg.
Yes.
Colour and size.
Just what are the differences in color between the black bear and the brown?
Well, just like
grizzly
your
bear?
hair and mine, Greg. You're black and I'm a little brown, you see.
Yes. And is there a law against having it for a household pet?
Yes, it's illegal. You're only allowed to keep them in a zoo or something like that.
Is it a wise idea to keep them in a zoo? Or where would it be a best place for them?
Well, Greg, I myself feel that any animal should be kept in its natural surroundings, not in cages. They enjoy it, and you enjoy it looking at them far better.
I see. And this bear was found just about where up north?
Near Cache Creek, Greg.
I see. Is that winter? Was that in winter?
That was in the spring of last year, actually, Greg.
Yes, and there is a law against having bears.
Yes, you're not allowed to keep them as a pet at all, Greg.
And what is the reason for that?
Mainly because the people can't look after them properly, and secondly, it's a very bad thing to have a wild animal as a pet, because when they grow up, they get quite a problem.
And can bears climb trees?
Oh, yes, they can climb very, very well indeed, Greg.
Just some bears can climb trees, or do
all the black and brown bears can climb, and the huskies too.
Well, thank you for coming down today, and now we have another item on our show.
In the year 2050, how will BC look? From agriculture to cities, how will climate change life? Don't miss 2050, Degrees of Change, a CBC Vancouver original podcast, now available.
Rising ocean temperatures could be putting some marine life at risk along the PEI coast. That's in new research from Dalhousie University. Tharsha Ravi Chakravarthi has more on one marine biologist's call to action.
The ocean is an integral part of life and the economy on PEI, but a marine biologist says rising seawater temperatures threaten that. Irene Novacek studies giant Irish sea moss in the eastern region, where she's seen firsthand how temperatures are going up.
In the estuaries, like in Basin Head, we are recording temperatures above 30 in the inner reaches of the estuary. Those are lethal temperatures for creatures like lobsters, mussels, Irish moss, salmon.
Novacek says as the temperatures go up, those species will migrate north in search of cooler water. But she says they won't necessarily find a suitable habitat.
Their preferred foods won't be there. There won't be habitat where they can hide from predators. Things are very different up along the Labrador coast than they are in the Southern Gulf. And so some of them won't survive.
A new article published in Nature Climate Change says 90% of all marine life is at risk. The research shows waters closest to the equator will feel that impact first, but at least a quarter of species around PEI are either high risk or critical. A co-author of the paper says this is due to high emissions.
In order to reduce emissions, of course, we need to transition from fossil fuels to renewables, and that's well known, and that shift is underway, although not maybe quite as fast as we would hope for.
Novacek says her team will continue to monitor changes in marine life, but to reduce risk requires a collective effort. That includes less emissions to stop temperatures from rising. Tharsha Ravi Chakravarthi, CBC News, Charlottetown.
Time now for meteorologist Johanna Wagstaffe to join us with the full BC forecast. As we mentioned, Joe, we saw the ferries. In fact, some ferries were canceled today because of wind. Windy day.
That's right. Yeah, very much so. The 6 p.m. Sailing from Tsawwassen to Victoria, Duke Point canceled it because of wind gusts that were up around 80 kilometers per hour in the strait. That's behind the cold front that's changing our weather across the province, but not dramatically. I want to show you the current temperatures right now, and you can really see the difference between those greens, 20 in Vancouver, 27 up towards Kelowna. I've given you the big picture because I want you to see how that heat, it now in place across southern prairies, actually extends back down to California. So it is connected, although we are certainly getting the bullseye in through California, where Santa Ana winds are also compressing and adding to those temperatures. But our heat is easing a little bit. We were sort of just a couple of degrees above seasonal early this week for most of southern BC, and we will be back down to seasonal, which is now sort of low 20s across much of BC. Taking you through the Thursday forecast, a few more lingering showers for the Rockies and in through the Kootenays. Nice day in through Haida Gwaii, Prince Rupert, few showers up towards Dease Lake, but really clearing back out. So watch these temperatures dip a couple more degrees as we head into Friday. Still quite muggy in the valley, and we will be watching for smoke to return Friday and Saturday. So northwesterly winds will really help clear things out across the interior, but that smoke may return as high pressure builds back in for Saturday and Sunday. Look at that heat. Those orange colors move back in. We're talking 30 back in place for Kelowna by the end of the weekend. So quite the temperature contrast, about a 10-degree swing in through the interior. For Vancouver, we'll see those changes more subtly. We're down in the low 20s the next couple of days, back to the mid-20s by the weekend. But that change will come with shifting winds and possibly a redirection of that smoke. So it's a heads up. Our smoke models are getting better and better each year, but there is definitely a higher risk of seeing that smoke in Metro Vancouver Friday and Saturday. 21 tomorrow and through Victoria. 17 up towards Prince George, much fresher, and through places like Quesnel, Williams Lake. There's that lovely 16 in through Prince Rupert with the sunshine. Dry, though, right through to early next week. This is a long, dry stretch. Still haven't seen much in the way of a cumulative rainfall across the south coast. So that 19 on Wednesday looks like we'll be ushering in some much-needed rain. And Dan, I figure by that point, we'll be happy to see it. We'll be ready.
Yeah, and the gardens, and the streets, and the cars, everything. Just
everything.
Everything.
Exactly.
Thanks, Joe.
You're welcome.
Swimming with sharks might be your idea of a good time, but at the Azores, it's big business. What the attraction is, after this.
An exorcism was conducted in July inside a cabin here with a group of boys. Several parents and one of the boys say this followed 4 days of intense indoctrination about demonic forces, as well as sleep deprivation and long days of activity in the summer heat. Parents went to police, but RCMP tell CBC no charges will be laid and the investigation is closed. Parents say that's a mistake, and criminal law experts agree.
You don't have to actually touch somebody for it to be an assault. If you cause a reasonable apprehension through gestures or threats or whatever, that is an assault. So I think that's the most likely criminal offense.
Quigley says legal responsibility extends beyond the camp leader who conducted the exorcism. Anyone who encouraged it, condoned it, or knew about it and did nothing to stop it could also be charged.
Somebody who wasn't at the scene when it happened also could be liable if they knew what was going to happen and in any way encouraged or permitted it to happen.
Another expert on exorcisms and their effects on children spoke to CBC News. He said that what happened at Redberry was likely criminal. He called it extremely abusive and cruel. He added, the young people were exposed to a range of very disturbing ideas and images, manipulated and encouraged to believe that normal, healthy experiences were opening the door to demonic forces. Redberry Bible Camp officials have refused repeated requests for interviews from CBC News. In a statement posted on their website this week, they called the exorcism a regrettable incident. They said they're sorry and are reviewing all of their policies. Jason Warwick, CBC News, Saskatoon.
Hi, I'm Amy Bell, and here's what's in your CBC Vancouver inbox.
September is Literacy Month. Have fun and support the cause by joining CBC Vancouver's Dan Burritt at Dakota's Team Trivia Challenge on September 21st. Register at dakota.ca and join CBC Vancouver's Angela Starrett at the annual Ravens Feast, a fundraising gala and art auction on September 29th in support of the Bill Reid Gallery. Get tickets at billreidgallery.ca.
If you want a close encounter with whale sharks, the largest fish on Earth, the middle of the Atlantic may be a good place to dip your toes in. The Azores, located about 1,400 kilometers west of the Portuguese coast. That's where you can do this. And there's a reason why tourists flock to this archipelago of 9 volcanic islands. Many marine creatures use these mild waters as a stopover during their long migration. Every year, about 20 different species make their way through the region between March and October. If you feel up for it, and I've done it before, being in the water in a cage with a great white, it'll wake you up. Thanks for being with us tonight on CBC Vancouver News at 6. You can watch this program on YouTube and on CBC Gym. That is our free app. Leanne Young will have your latest late local news at 11 o'clock, right after the National. Good night.